They told her to strip for a standard inspection, laughed as she unzipped her jumpsuit, elbowed each other, whispered dirty stuff under their breath. One even lifted his phone, acting like he was just checking the time. And then she turned her back. That's when the commander walked in. And everything stopped because the tattoo on her spine wasn't just some pretty design. It was a secret code from a unit that wasn't supposed to exist. And in an instant, the guys who humiliated her weren't laughing anymore. Want to know what happened when the colonel saw it? Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Then hit subscribe because we upload daily. Now back to it. She walked into that hangar like she belonged there. Not with a big show or attitude, just with the quiet sureness of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The name was Ela Rohr, and she didn't look like much. Maybe 40-something, pushing 50, with graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun, coveralls that had seen better days, steel-toed boots that actually showed wear. She carried a battered clipboard and a toolbox that looked older than some of the airmen working the bay. But here's the thing about assumptions. They're dangerous when you're dealing with people whose stories you don't know. The midday sun had turned Falcon Ridge Air Station into a furnace. Heat waves danced off the tarmac. And inside Hangar 7, the air conditioning struggled against the desert, trying to bake everything in sight. The smell of jet fuel mixed with hot metal and that particular mix of sweat and machinery that every mechanic knows by heart. Power tools whined, engines hummed, and somewhere in the back, a radio crackled with tower communications that sounded like another language to civilian ears. Ela signed in at the duty station with movements that were precise and practiced. Her handwriting was the kind you see from people who filled out forms in sandstorms and signed reports while mortar fell in the distance. Clean block letters, no wasted motion. The duty sergeant, an older NCO with grease under his fingernails, and 20 years of aircraft maintenance in his eyes, glanced at her paperwork. Structural assessment on the Blackhawks, that's right. Been a while since we've had someone from your company. Last guy couldn't tell a rotor hub from a landing skid. I'm not the last guy, Ela replied simply. Something in her tone made him look up, the way she stood, the way she spoke. It reminded him of the old-school crew chiefs he'd learned from, the ones who could diagnose engine problems by sound and fix anything with a wrench and some creative language. Well, aircraft's in Bay 7, pre-flight inspections already done, but feel free to run your own checks. She wasn't trying to be invisible, but she wasn't announcing herself either. Just another contractor doing another job on another Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday in the military machine. That's when Lance Corporal Tred Harper decided to make her his entertainment. Harper was 22 and thought he ran the world because he wore chevrons and had never been anywhere that would teach him otherwise. Fresh out of technical school, assigned to his first duty station, still believing that rank meant respect and volume equaled authority. His uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut paper, his boots polished to mirrors, and his attitude louder than the helicopters outside. He'd been having a rough week, failed his first aircraft systems test, got chewed out by his supervisor for improper tool accountability, and watched 3 of his classmates get promoted while he stayed at the same rank, looking for someone to take it out on. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, not bothering to walk over, making her come to him. "You here for the avionics inspection?" Ela looked up from her clipboard. Her eyes were calm, direct, no hostility, no challenge. Just the quiet attention of someone who'd learned to read situations before they got complicated. "Structural assessment. Going to need to see your clearance documentation. New security protocols." She pulled a folder from her coveralls, handed it over without comment. Harper made a show of examining it, squinting at stamps and signatures like he was some kind of expert. Behind him, 3 other mechanics had gathered, drawn by that magnetic pull of someone potentially getting hassled. Specialist Morrison, barely 19, with soft hands that had never worked on anything more complex than a lawnmower before the Air Force. Private First Class Chun, who spent most of his free time playing video games and complaining about military food, and Senior Airman Rodriguez, who should have known better, but was too busy trying to impress the younger guys to speak up, says here, "You're cleared for structural assessment," Harper said like he'd caught her in a lie. "That's not the same as avionics access. Structural assessment includes avionics mounting points," Isla replied evenly. "Has since 2018. Chun laughed. "She knows the regs better than you do, Harper." But Harper wasn't backing down. He had an audience now, and in his world, that meant doubling down. Plus, there was something about this woman that rubbed him wrong. Maybe it was the way she didn't seem impressed by his uniform. Maybe it was how she answered his questions without the difference he thought he deserved. Well, regulations have changed again. New electromagnetic security protocols. Can't have unauthorized electronics near sensitive equipment. He folded his arms, trying to look official. "Going to need you to verify you're not carrying any contraband devices." The duty sergeant looked up from his paperwork. "Harper, what the hell are you?" "I've got this, Sergeant. Chain of command." The sergeant shook his head and went back to his work, but his jaw was tight. He'd seen this before. Young NCOs drunk on their first taste of power, making problems where none existed. Ayla's expression didn't change. Such as phones, recording equipment, transmitters, could be sewn into clothing, hidden in undergarments. Full compliance check required. The hangar got quieter, not silent, but quieter. Tools still worked, engines still hummed, but conversations dropped to murmurs. The kind of shift that happens when people sense something crossing a line. Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Harper, maybe we should just. Maybe you should let me handle this, specialist." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Isla's voice remained level. "Strip search, top half standard procedure for uncleared personnel in restricted areas." That was a lie, and everybody knew it. The duty sergeant's head snapped up, his face darkening. Rodriguez took a step back, suddenly wanting distance from whatever was about to happen. But Harper was banking on her not knowing the real regulations or not wanting to cause a scene. Chun pulled out his phone, angling it low. "This is going to be good." "Put that thing away," Rodriguez hissed, but Chun just grinned. Hila stood there. For a long moment, clipboard in her hands, looking at this kid who thought he could humiliate her because she was older, quieter, alone. She could have called for the duty sergeant, could have demanded to speak to a supervisor, could have walked away and let someone else deal with the entitled child-playing soldier. Instead, she set the clipboard down on a nearby workbench, started unzipping her coveralls. "Jesus, she's actually doing it," Morrison whispered. The fabric parted with the soft whisper of worn cotton, revealing a plain gray t-shirt underneath. No jewelry, no hidden devices, just the practical undergarments of someone who dressed for function, not fashion. She pulled the coveralls down to her waist, tied the sleeves around her hips, and stood there with her arms at her sides. The mechanic stared, not with respect or professionalism, but with the ugly curiosity of men who'd found someone they could push around without consequences. "Satisfied?" she asked. Harper grinned. "Turn around." Full inspection. And that's when she turned. The t-shirt was thin, faded from too many washes, and it clung to her back in a way that revealed everything, including the black ink that ran down her spine like a lightning bolt. It wasn't decorative, wasn't art. It was 3 stark elements burned into skin with military precision. A downward-pointing triangle sharp as a blade. Below it, numbers that looked like coordinates VO3147. And at the base, just visible above, her waistband, the silhouette of a bird of prey with wings spread wide. Most of the room didn't know what they were looking at. Just some old tattoo from some old service member trying to relive her glory days. Chun was still recording. Check out Granny's stamp. Morrison laughed nervously. Probably got it when she was in the National Guard or something. But Rodriguez, who had grown up in a military family and heard his grandfather's stories about classified operations that never made the papers, felt something cold settle in his stomach because he'd seen markings like that before. In old photos his grandfather showed him before burning them. Unit identifiers for groups that didn't officially exist. That's when Colonel Darius Fenn walked through the hangar doors with 2 senior officers for a routine inspection. The folder in his hand hit the concrete floor with a sharp slap that echoed through the hangar. His escort officers looked at him in confusion, then followed his gaze to the woman standing in her underwear in the middle of their maintenance bay. Jesus Christ, Fenn whispered. Because that triangle wasn't just a tattoo. It was a unit identifier for Task Force Viper, a black operations group that officially never existed. The numbers weren't random. They were a mission code from Afghanistan 2011, an insertion that went so wrong it was classified beyond top secret and buried so deep that even people with clearance weren't supposed to know it happened. And the bird, that wasn't decoration either. That was the mark they gave to operators who'd been left behind and found their own way home. Fenn had been a major then, working intelligence liaison at Bagram. He'd seen the after-action reports before they were shredded, knew about the helicopter that went down behind enemy lines, knew about the 3 operators who were supposed to be dead, but somehow made it to friendly territory 6 days later, carrying intelligence that prevented a major Taliban offensive. He also knew that those 3 operators had been given new identities and strict orders to disappear forever. Ela Rohr wasn't just some contractor. She was a ghost. The kind of ghost that defense departments created when operations went sideways and heroes needed to disappear for the good of national security. The kind that got new identities, clean records, and strict instructions to never speak about where they'd been or what they'd done. But Skin remembered what paperwork forgot. Harper was still grinning, still playing to his audience. See anything you want to report, ma'am. Chun was zooming in with his phone. This is definitely going on social media. Isla began turning back around, her movements unhurried, professional, like she was completing a task that had been assigned to her by someone with actual authority. That's when Fenn found his voice. Stand down, Corporal. The words cut through the hangar noise like a blade. Every conversation stopped. Every tool went quiet. Even the distant radio chatter seemed to pause. Harper spun around, his face going through several shades of pale as he realized. Who was watching? Sir, just conducting a routine security. I said stand down. Fenn's voice carried the kind of authority that came from making life and death decisions in places where the rules were written in blood. He walked across the hangar floor with deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving Isla's face. The 2 officers with him, a major and a captain, hung back. They didn't understand what was happening, but they recognized the look on their colonel's face. The same look he got when classified communications came in from Washington. Ma'am, Fenn said quietly, you can get dressed. She nodded once and began pulling her coveralls back up, zipping them with the same unhurried precision she'd used to remove them. No shame, no anger, no demand for apologies, just the quiet dignity of someone who'd endured worse things than public humiliation and survived them all. Chun was still holding his phone up. Sir, should I send this too? You will delete that footage immediately, or I will have you court-martialed for recording classified personnel without authorization. Classified? But she's just a delete it now. Chun's hands shook as he fumbled with his phone. The video disappeared with a few taps, and he shoved the device back in his pocket like it was radioactive. When Isla was fully dressed again, Fenn stepped closer, close enough that his next words were meant for her alone. Task Force Viper was decommissioned. In 2012, he said softly. Officially, Isla replied, there are no official records of your service. That was the point. Fen studied her face, seeing things there that most people would miss. The way her eyes tracked movement without appearing to watch. The slight scarring on her knuckles that came from fighting in close quarters. The way she stood with her weight balanced, always ready to move. "You're not supposed to exist," he said. "Neither is that modified Raptor in Bay 3. But here we are." That got his attention because the aircraft in Bay 3 was classified above his pay grade. And there was no way a civilian contractor should know what was under that tarp. Unless she wasn't really a civilian, unless her clearance ran deeper than the paperwork showed. Unless she was exactly who he thought she was. Fen turned to face the assembled mechanics who were watching this exchange with the growing realization that they just stepped in something they didn't understand. Harper looked like he wanted to disappear. Chun was pale as desert sand. Morrison kept glancing between Fen and Isla like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Everyone out," Fen said. "Now, sir, we've got scheduled maintenance, Rodriguez." "Started. I don't care if you've got the President of the United States scheduled for a tune-up. Clear this hangar. Anyone who discusses what just happened will be washing dishes in the mess hall until their enlistment expires." The mechanics scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Harper tried to linger, tried to explain, tried to salvage something from the wreckage of his authority. "Sir, I was just following protocol, new security measures that came down from Corporal Harper." Fen's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Report to my office at 1400 hours. Bring your supervisor. We're going to have a conversation about what protocol actually means." Harper's face went white. A meeting with the base commander and with his supervisor present usually meant one thing: paperwork that followed you for the rest of your career. When the hangar was empty, except for the two of them and Fen's officers, the colonel pulled out his phone and made a call to a number that wasn't in any directory. "This is Fen at Falcon Ridge. I need immediate verification on a Ela Roar contractor credentials background check priority alpha." He listened for a moment, his expression growing more serious. "I see. And the classification level, understood. What about current operational status?" Another pause. "Copy that. And if someone had hypothetically compromised her cover, I understand. Thank you." He ended the call and looked at Isla, who had picked up her clipboard and was calmly reviewing her inspection checklist like nothing had happened. "They tell me you've got clearance I'm not allowed to ask about," he said. "Then don't ask. But I can give you whatever you need to do your job properly." She looked up from her clipboard. "I just need to finish my inspection and file my report. Same as any other day. After what just happened, you want to keep working. After what just happened, this job needs to get done right." And that, Fen realized, told him everything he needed to know about who she really was. The major stepped forward, confusion clear on his face. "Sir, I don't understand what just." "You don't need to understand, Major. You just need to make sure Miss Roar has whatever she needs to complete her work, and that no one bothers her again." For the next 2 hours, Isla worked with the kind of quiet competence that made experienced officers take notice. She didn't just inspect equipment, she understood it. Knew which bolts carried stress and which were just for show. Could spot metal fatigue that wouldn't show up on instruments for another 1,000 flight hours. She worked like someone who'd maintained aircraft in conditions where failure meant people died. Who'd made repairs with improvised tools while under fire. Who'd signed off on aircraft she'd have to fly in herself, knowing that her signature was a promise written in her own blood. Word of what happened had started spreading through the base in that way military gossip always does. Quietly through maintenance crews and duty shifts, each telling carrying a little more weight than the last. By the time Ela was halfway through her inspection, senior NCOs were finding excuses to walk through Hangar 7. Master Sergeant Williams, who'd been fixing helicopters since before most of the crew was born, stopped by to watch her work the tail rotor assembly. He didn't say anything, just observed as she traced vibration patterns with her fingers, feeling for irregularities that instruments might miss. "Blade tracks off by about 2 millimeters, she said without looking up. "Probably been that way for weeks." Williams checked his maintenance logs. Sure enough, pilots had been reporting slight vibrations during hover operations. Nothing serious enough to ground the aircraft, but enough to make careful pilots uneasy. "How'd you spot that without running the engine?" "Feel the blade tips. Weight distribution tells you everything." She was right. Williams had been troubleshooting that vibration for 3 weeks with diagnostic equipment and computer analysis. She'd found it in 5 minutes with her hands. "You do this kind of work overseas?" he asked carefully. "Different aircraft?" "Same principles." She moved to the engine compartment, ran her fingers along hydraulic lines with the practiced touch of someone who'd learned to find leaks by feel in complete darkness. "Your number 2 hydraulic pump is running hot. Probably has been for a while." Williams pulled up the maintenance records on his tablet. The pump had been flagged for replacement during the next scheduled overhaul, still months away, but the temperature readings showed it was degrading faster than expected. "We've been monitoring that." "How'd you know?" "Metal expansion. The housing stressed differently than the primary pump. Feel here." She guided his hand to a spot where the pump casing met the mounting bracket. "Different vibration frequency. It's working harder than it should." Williams had been fixing helicopters for 3 decades, but he was learning things he'd never considered. This wasn't textbook knowledge. This was field experience earned in places where equipment failure meant people died. Fenn watched from a distance as she checked the rotor hub assembly, her movements precise and confident. She found a hairline crack in a support that the regular maintenance crew had missed. Identified a bearing that was wearing unevenly. Probably good for another 100 hours, but worth watching. Caught a loose safety wire that could have caused a hydraulic leak at altitude. Each discovery was logged methodically, professionally. Number. Drama, no self-congratulation. Just the quiet competence of someone who understood that other people's lives depended on getting the details right. When she finished, her report was thorough, professional, and contained 3 recommendations that would prevent catastrophic failures nobody else had even considered. Williams signed off as witness to her findings. His signature carried weight. 30 years of aircraft maintenance, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a reputation for never passing faulty equipment. "Ma'am," he said quietly as she packed up her tools. "Good work." Coming from Williams, that was high praise. The kind that got repeated in crew chiefs' meetings and remembered during performance reviews. Fenn read it twice, then looked at her with something approaching awe. "Where did you really serve?" he asked. "Places that don't exist on maps," she replied. "Doing what?" "Things that don't exist in manuals." He nodded, understanding that some questions shouldn't be asked, even by people with clearance to ask them. The duty sergeant approached with a maintenance log. "Ma'am, if you could sign off on the inspection." Isla took the pen and signed her name, with the same precise handwriting she'd used on the entry roster. But the sergeant noticed something else. The way she held the pen, the small scar on her trigger finger, the calluses that came from handling weapons and tools under extreme conditions. He'd seen marks like that before on the hands of the special operations crew chiefs who flew the classified missions nobody talked about. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "Good work." As Ayla packed up her tools, Fenn made another call. This one to his superior, explaining that the contractor in question had been cleared for unrestricted access and that any personnel who'd shown her disrespect would be receiving additional training on proper treatment of classified personnel. When she was ready to leave, he walked her to the hangar doors. "You don't have to come back here," he said. "I can make sure you get assignments that don't involve dealing with kids who don't know any better." Ayla shouldered her toolbox and looked back at the hangar where she'd been humiliated, stripped, and mocked. "I'll be back next month for the follow-up inspection," she said. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the flight line where young pilots were pre-flighting their aircraft, trusting their lives to equipment maintained by people they'd never meet. Because those kids need to learn that the quiet ones have stories too. And sometimes those stories matter more than the loud ones. She walked out into the desert heat, her footsteps steady on the concrete apron. Behind her, the hangar returned to its normal rhythms of maintenance and preparation. But something had changed in that space, something that would ripple through conversations and memories for years to come. At 1400 hours, Lance Corporal Harper stood outside Colonel Fenn's office, his dress uniform perfect, but his hands shaking slightly. His supervisor, Technical Sergeant Mills, waited beside him with the kind of expression that said this conversation wasn't going to go well for anyone. "Just remember," Mills said quietly, "tell the truth. Don't try to justify it." The door opened. Fenn's aide gestured them in. The meeting lasted 20 minutes. When Harper emerged, his face was pale and his career trajectory had changed significantly. Extra duty for 6 weeks, mandatory training on treatment of personnel with classified backgrounds, a letter of reprimand in his permanent file, and a recommendation that he spend some time thinking about what leadership actually meant. But the real consequences were already spreading through the base. By evening chow, every crew chief and maintenance supervisor had heard some version of what happened in Hangar 7. The story varied in details, but the core remained consistent. A contractor had been humiliated by junior personnel, and that contractor turned out to be someone whose service record was classified at levels most people couldn't even imagine. Master Sergeant Williams found Harper in the enlisted club that night, staring into a beer he wasn't drinking. "Mind if I sit?" Harper shrugged. Williams settled into the chair across from him. "You know what you did today, son?" "Everyone keeps asking me that. Because everyone wants to make sure you understand. That woman you embarrassed, she's the kind of person this whole base exists to support. The kind who does the jobs that let the rest of us sleep at night." Harper looked up. "How do you know?" 30 years in this business. You learn to recognize certain things. The way she handled tools. The way she found problems we'd missed. The way she carried herself when you tried to break her down. Williams paused, but mostly it was the way Colonel Fenn reacted. "I've never seen him look like that." Before Harper was quiet for a moment. "What should I have done?" Asked questions before making assumptions. Treated her with the respect you'd want if you were in her position. Remembered that the uniform is supposed to mean something. Rodriguez found Harper later, standing at a window overlooking the flight line where the night shift was prepping aircraft for morning operations. "You know what you did, right?" Rodriguez said quietly. "Everyone's been telling me. Good, because my grandfather served in Vietnam, worked intelligence. He told me about people like her. The ones who did the jobs that never happened in places we never were against enemies we never fought." Rodriguez paused, watching the ground crews work under the floodlights. He said you could always spot them. The way they moved, the way they watched everything without seeming to. The way they carried themselves like they'd been through hell and come out the other side. Harper said nothing. "You humiliated a war hero today. Someone who probably saved more lives than you'll ever know. And you did it because you thought she was weak. How was I supposed to know? That's the point. You don't know who you're dealing with until you take the time to find out. And by then, it might be too late to make a first impression." The desert wind caught the edge of Isla's collar. As she reached the gate, lifting it just enough to reveal the top edge of that triangle tattoo. The guard who processed her exit was a senior sergeant, 30 years in service, who had seen enough classified operations to recognize certain kinds of ink when he saw it. He didn't ask questions, just nodded respectfully and handed back her credentials. "Have a good day, ma'am." "You too, Sergeant." 3 weeks later, when the next civilian contractor showed up for an avionics inspection, the atmosphere in Hangar 7 was different. The crew was professional, courteous, helpful. They asked about qualifications instead of making assumptions, offered assistance instead of obstacles. Because word had spread through the base in that way important lessons do. Through duty shifts and maintenance briefings, through NCO meetings and casual conversations over coffee. Not the gossip version of what happened, but the lesson version. Treat people with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. Ask questions before making judgments. Remember that you never know who you're dealing with until it's too late to change your first impression. Master Sergeant Williams made it part of his training program for new mechanics. Not the specific story that stayed in Hangar 7, but the principle behind it. The idea that quiet competence deserved recognition, that humility often masked experience, and that the military worked best when people looked out for each other instead of looking for people to push around. Colonel Fenn kept Ila's inspection report on his desk for months afterward. Not because it was unusual, though her recommendations had prevented 2 potential aircraft failures, but because it represented something he wanted his people to remember. Excellence didn't announce itself. It just showed up, did the work, and left things better than it found them. And then she was gone, walking out into a world where her service remained classified, her sacrifices unrecognized and her stories untold, but leaving behind a hangar full of people who would never again assume that quiet meant weak or that silence meant nothing important to say. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who don't need to tell you how dangerous they are. Sometimes the real heroes are the ones who never get parades. And sometimes when you think you know who you're dealing with, you discover you don't know anything at all. Have you ever seen someone underestimated because they chose to stay quiet? Drop your thoughts below. We read every single comment. If this story hit different, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about the heroes hiding in plain sight. And don't go anywhere. Your next story is already queued up and waiting.